The woman helped the homeless man by giving him food and clothes, but when he showed her a photo of his missing son, she couldn't believe her eyes. On the outskirts of a small English town, where every house seemed like a picture from an old fairy tale book, lived a woman named Emily. Approaching her 50s, her heart still held warmth and youth. Emily's life was full of stories, ranging from a tumultuous youth to peaceful retirement days. Despite her age, she retained a sincere optimism and belief in the kindness of people. Emily lived with her cat named Leonard, who, as she liked to joke, behaved more like a king than a pet. Leonard was a Persian cat with a luxurious coat and a regal demeanor, effortlessly getting Emily to do whatever he wished. She often talked to him as if he were an old friend, sharing her joys and sorrows, and it seemed he understood every word she said. Emily's days flowed calmly. She attended to household chores, cooked, and read books. From time to time, she helped her neighbors, carrying groceries for a lonely mother from the first floor or planting flowers with the children from the neighboring house. Her life was simple, but she liked it that way. In the evenings, sitting by the window in her cozy living room, Emily enjoyed watching the sunset. The city lights flickered in the distance, and the cool evening breeze whispered old melodies through the gaps in the old wooden frames of her home. These moments made her feel a special connection with the world outside her little universe. Every time she looked at passers-by, she could only guess about their lives. Many of them were merely fleeting shadows to her, appearing and disappearing as quickly as they came. But one day, her gaze fell upon a person who was unlike the others. This man, a middle-aged vagrant, was also alone. Thomas, as he was called, had no home and spent his days wandering the city streets. His appearance in her life was as unexpected as a cool breeze on a hot summer day. He was dressed in a worn jacket and tattered trousers. There was something in his eyes that instantly caught Emily's attention, a deep sadness and loneliness akin to her own. He seemed like a ghost from another time that had accidentally wandered into her world. Over the following weeks, Emily continued to observe the man, who she now noticed in various places around their small town. The vagrant, as she had initially thought, was not an ordinary homeless person. Once, she saw him in a pharmacy, not buying alcohol as many might assume, but asking about medicines and valerian root. His gait was unsteady, but there was a certain determination in his eyes. On another occasion, Emily saw him by the dumpsters, not among empty bottles or food scraps, but rummaging through old books and various papers. He was searching for something, and his search seemed purposeful, as if he was looking through the trash for lost pages of his life. Emily often saw him in the local supermarket, where he bought the cheapest food but always chose his products wisely. Never buying alcohol, he consistently opted for bread, cheese, and sometimes a small can of tuna. One day, while walking past the park, Emily saw him feeding the birds. He was sitting on an old bench, slowly scattering crumbs, and a multitude of sparrows had gathered around him. They were not afraid of him, and it seemed the man found solace in this small act of kindness, being needed and useful, even if it was just for the birds. On a cool morning, as spring began to paint the city in bright colors, Emily was out for her usual walk in the park. It was her morning ritual. She loved to start the day with a walk, soaking up the fresh air and tranquility. This time, she unexpectedly saw Thomas sitting on the same bench where he had recently fed the birds. This time, there were no birds, no crumbs, just the solitary man, lost in thought. Today, Emily decided she wouldn't pass by as she had before. Her heart was full of compassion for this strange and enigmatic man. She approached the bench slowly, trying not to startle him, and, sitting down beside him, quietly said, "Lovely morning, isn't it?" Thomas looked up, his face weary, but his eyes flashed with surprise and a hint of warmth. He nodded and smiled faintly, replying, "Yes, it's quite nice." Emily sensed that this was the perfect moment for a conversation, natural and simple. She asked him about the birds he had been feeding that day. The question intrigued Thomas, and he began to talk about his love for nature, how he watched the birds, and how it helped him stay connected to the world despite the difficulties of his current life. Birds don't know boundaries, they aren't burdened by possessions or fears, they're just free and live in the moment, he said melancholically, watching the sparrows begin to gather around them. Emily listened attentively, nodding in response, and felt a gentle understanding forming between them. She shared her own story about Leonard, her Persian cat, who, she said, was as free-spirited as the birds. Thomas smiled as he listened to the quirks and endearing habits of Leonard. He admitted that he had always dreamed of having a home where he could have a dog or a cat, but circumstances had not been in his favor. The conversation flowed smoothly and effortlessly, as if they were old friends meeting after a long separation. They talked about the small joys in life, the simple things that bring satisfaction and peace. Emily felt her initial sympathy turning into genuine interest and concern for the man who, despite his challenging circumstances, maintained his kindness and attentiveness to the world. As the sun began to climb higher and the park slowly filled with the sounds of morning activity, Emily and Thomas slowly rose from the bench. She felt that this conversation had changed her perception of Thomas significantly. He was no longer just a lonely drifter, he had become a person with a story, hopes, and dreams. As they said goodbye, Thomas thanked her for the company and for taking the time to talk with him. Emily smiled in return and promised that they would see each other again. She walked home with a new sense of connection and understanding, her heart full of warmth and hope. Emily greeted the morning of her birthday with anticipation and joyful expectation. As usual, she began the day by preparing the dishes she planned to serve her guests. The table was a true feast: homemade pies, fresh vegetable dishes, her signature salad, and many other delights. She decorated the table with bright napkins and fresh flowers, though deep down, she was anxious that something might go wrong. The phone call interrupted her thoughts. It was the call from her daughter that she had been eagerly awaiting, but it brought only disappointment. "Mom, I'm so sorry, but I won't be able to make it today," her daughter said with an apologetic tone. "The youngest has a stomach ache, and we can't leave him. I was really looking forward to today," but her voice trailed off. Emily tried to hide her disappointment. "Of course, dear, health is more important. Take care of yourselves." After she hung up, the phone rang again. This time it was her son. "Hi, Mom. I know today is your big day, but we've had an incredible opportunity to take a short trip. We're already at the airport." "Well, a trip is always good." "Enjoy yourself, my dear," she said with difficulty, trying to sound more cheerful than she felt. Once the phone calls ended, she looked at the full table of food, so many treats, so much effort, all now left unappreciated. The room was enveloped in a profound silence, broken only by the faint noise of the street outside. A sense of loneliness enveloped Emily, and she realized that this birthday would be nothing like she had dreamed. Trying to distract herself, Emily went outside to search for Leonard, who had also decided to go missing on this day. "Leonard, here, kitty kitty kitty," she called softly as she walked past familiar yards and alleys. But there was no sign of her cat. Suddenly, a familiar voice called from behind her, "Good afternoon, Emily. May I help you?" She turned around and saw Thomas with a small bouquet of wildflowers in his hands. "Oh, Thomas, thank you," Emily said as she took the flowers, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm just looking for Leonard. He should be around here somewhere. My children are coming today, and I just don't want to be alone." "You're not alone, I'm here," Thomas said confidently, and together they continued the search. At that moment, a special sense of understanding and closeness developed between them, as if the world had paused for a moment, giving them a chance to find solace in each other on what had become a not-so-lonely birthday after all. Emily and Thomas slowly strolled down the narrow streets, occasionally stopping to call for Leonard. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden light over the city, making the evening feel especially cozy. "I'm so grateful for your help, Thomas," Emily said as they approached a small park where Leonard liked to bask in the sunlight. "It's nothing, Emily. It's the least I can do for you," Thomas replied with a modest smile. His eyes occasionally met hers, and in each glance, there was tenderness and understanding. Suddenly, a quiet but distinct meow came from behind some bushes. Emily turned toward the sound, her heart racing. "Leonard," she exclaimed. Thomas carefully approached the bushes and pulled out the frightened but unharmed cat. "It looks like we've found your runaway," Thomas said, handing the cat to Emily. The sight of the animal was disheartening. It was filthy, covered in grime, and smelled of who knows what. "Is this really my cat?" Emily gasped, taking her precious pet in her arms. "I pampered you, blew away the dust, treated you with shrimp, and you preferred the local trash heaps? Where did you manage to get so dirty?" she said, smiling as she spoke to the animal. Both of them sighed with relief as they sat down on a bench in the park. Emily, cradling Leonard in her lap, looked at Thomas. "You have no idea how happy I am that you're here with me. I would have felt so lonely tonight." Thomas nodded, understandingly gazing at her. "Life on the streets teaches you to value company, even if it's just a chance meeting. But I'm glad I can share this evening with someone who appreciates life as much as you do. You know, Thomas, I always thought I could do without many things. But loneliness is something so hard to bear. How do you cope with it?" Thomas thoughtfully looked at the sunset. "Lonely days make you reflect on a lot. But I've found comfort in small joys, the smiles of strangers, the beauty of nature, the birds that come for crumbs, and now in new friends." "Come with us," Emily said to Thomas. "Leonard needs a bath, and then we could have dinner together. I've prepared so many salads, baked so many pies, and there's no one to share them with. It would be a shame for it to go to waste. I put so much love into the cooking." "Well, if it's with love and just for a little while," Thomas hesitated. When they reached the apartment and cleaned up Leonard, she set the table. "I prepared all this for friends and family, but unfortunately, no one could make it. My son went away on vacation, and my daughter couldn't get away with the kids. But I'm glad you're here, it makes this day special." Thomas, slightly embarrassed by the warm reception and the abundance of food, felt a bit overwhelmed. "Emily, I don't know what to say. Thank you for your hospitality. It means so much to me." "Thomas, I should be thanking you," Emily said with a smile, handing him a plate with pie. "You made my evening special today, and this is the best gift I could have received." As the evening turned into night, their conversations grew warmer and more heartfelt. Emily and Thomas discovered they had much to share with each other, and their shared experiences created a unique bond between them. What had started as a night of loneliness and disappointment had transformed into an evening of surprising revelations and newfound friendship. When the meal was over, Emily suggested Thomas use the shower. She noticed his hesitance and the way he awkwardly shuffled his feet, seemingly unsure about accepting her offer. "You'll feel better after a warm shower," she said gently, guiding him to the bathroom. "And I have some clean clothes that belong to my brother. They should fit you." Trying to hide his nervousness, Thomas nodded. He followed Emily into the bathroom, where she showed him the towels and toiletries before leaving him alone and closing the door. Alone, Thomas slowly removed his worn-out jacket and frayed pants. Standing before the mirror, he took a long look at himself. His face was tired, and his hair was tangled. Turning on the water, he stepped under the warm shower, feeling the water wash away not only the dirt, but also the weight of the past years spent on the streets. The water was pleasantly hot, and each drop felt like a small healing touch for his exhausted body. Thomas closed his eyes, letting the steam and water envelop him, washing away the years of loneliness and wandering. In that moment, he felt like he could start anew, like not everything was lost. After his shower, Thomas found the old but clean shirt and jeans Emily had left for him. They fit him perfectly, as if they were tailor-made. Dressed in them, he looked like a completely different person, more confident and composed. When he emerged from the bathroom, Emily barely recognized him at first. Thomas stood before her, transformed, and his eyes now looked at the world differently. He resembled the person he had been before all his misfortunes. "Oh, Thomas, I hardly recognized you," Emily exclaimed. "You look simply wonderful." "Thank you, Emily," he replied, slightly embarrassed. "I don't remember the last time I felt so good and clean." This is more than I could have asked for." Tears of joy and compassion welled up in Emily's eyes. At that moment, she realized how important this evening was not just for her, but also for Thomas. They settled back in the living room, wrapped in warm blankets, and continued their conversation. "Thomas, tell me about yourself, about your life before all this," Emily asked quietly, pouring him a cup of tea. Thomas looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "My name is Thomas, and I used to be an engineer," he began, his voice soft but clear. "My life was stable and happy until tragedy struck. My wife, Marie, died of cancer. It was a long and exhausting process that drained both of us. After her death, I just couldn't find my place." Emily nodded silently, encouraging him to continue. Thomas took a deep breath, as if bracing himself to dive into the dark depths of his past. "I started drinking, first to escape, then to find some way to sleep at night. My son, Jacob, tried to support me, but it was hard. He was still a student, and seeing me like that was unbearable for him. Eventually, he couldn't take it anymore and left. He transferred to another university, and we lost touch." Thomas paused, his hands trembling as he adjusted the napkin on his lap. Emily reached out, touching him in a gesture of support. "When I realized that I had lost not only my wife but also my son, I tried to find him. But it was too late. Scammers, taking advantage of my condition, tricked me into signing documents to sell the apartment. One day I woke up, and I was thrown out. That's how I ended up homeless, without money and without hope." Thomas's voice was weary, but there was no anger in his words, only sadness. Emily could only imagine the strength of will he must have had to keep going after all these losses. "Since then, I've been living on the streets. I've spent years trying to find Jacob, but without success. It seems like he doesn't want to be found, or perhaps he's ashamed of what I've become," Thomas concluded, lowering his gaze. Emily gently squeezed his hand. "Thomas, thank you for sharing your story with me. No one should go through something like this alone. Now you're here, and you're not alone." These simple but sincere words made Thomas lift his eyes. There was a glimmer of gratitude, and perhaps hope, in his gaze. There was a pause in the room before Thomas continued. "Emily, there's something I'd like to show you. It might seem strange, but—" His voice faltered as he began rummaging through the pocket of his worn jacket. Finally, he pulled out a small, tattered photograph and handed it to Emily. The photograph showed three people: a man with a younger, brighter, and happier face, a woman with a loving smile, and a young man who was grinning widely. Emily took the photograph in her hands, her breath catching in her throat. "Thomas, this young man, is that Jacob?" Her voice trembled with emotion. "Yes, that's him. My son," Thomas said, looking at the photograph over her shoulder, his eyes filling with tears. He was a veterinarian who saved my cat Leonard years ago after an accident," Emily whispered, her hands slightly shaking as she held the photograph. "He helped me through one of the most difficult moments of my life." Thomas looked up sharply, his gaze full of astonishment. You knew my son? How is that possible?" "It was many years ago," Emily said slowly, sitting back down at the table while still holding the photograph. "I was in shock after the accident, and he was so kind and attentive. He not only saved my cat, but also gave me comfort at that moment. I've never forgotten him." Thomas was silent, absorbed in this revelation. I've been searching for him for so many years, but every lead seemed to be a dead end. I didn't even know if he was alive." Emily took his hands in hers. "Thomas, your son is a wonderful person. He helped me when I needed it most." Emily decided to share a story with Thomas that had forever changed her perspective on life and her faithful companion, Leonard. "Leonard isn't just a pet, he's my savior," she began with a quiet smile. "One autumn day, when the streets were covered with wet leaves and the air buzzed with the anticipation of winter, my cat showed extraordinary cleverness and bravery. It was an ordinary day. I was coming home with groceries. At the intersection, lost in thoughts about upcoming tasks, I didn't notice a car speeding toward me. Everything happened too quickly. But then, out of nowhere, Leonard jumped in front of me, meowed, and bumped into my leg so hard that I lost my balance and fell back onto the sidewalk. The car whizzed past just inches away from me, speeding off without touching me. Emily paused, recalling the frightening moment. I was in shock, lying on the cold pavement, while Leonard, already struggling to breathe, purred beside me. He saved my life with his sacrifice. I scooped him up and ran to the nearest veterinarian, who turned out to be your son, Thomas. Jacob met me at the door. His quick and professional intervention helped save Leonard's life. I couldn't hold back the tears seeing my little hero fighting for his life under your son's caring hands. Jacob didn't charge me a penny for the treatment, saying that he saw how much I loved Leonard and how much he loved me. Just keep doing good, he told me as we said goodbye. That day changed a lot in my life, Thomas. I began to value every moment, understanding that life can change in the blink of an eye. And every time I look at Leonard, I see not just a cat but a true guardian angel. Tears sparkled in Emily's eyes, reflecting the light of the lamp and an endless gratitude for the life she had been given and for the new friend sitting beside her at the table that evening. Setting her teacup aside, Emily looked at Thomas with a serious expression. The room was filled with a mix of tension and anticipation, blending with the warm glow of the desk lamp. Thomas, I have an idea. What if we try to meet with your son? I know where he works, at a veterinary clinic on the edge of town, Emily began, her voice sounding confident and resolute. Thomas, still processing the recent revelations, nodded slowly. Yes, I remember. You said he was very kind to animals, and to you. That's wonderful, Emily, but do you think he'd want to see me? After everything I've done. Thomas, it's a chance. A chance for both of you. Maybe he's waiting for you to make the first move. And I'll be right there with you. You won't have to do it alone, Emily said reassuringly, giving him a supportive smile. I don't know, Emily, this is all so sudden. I'm not sure I'll handle it if he rejects me. Thomas looked visibly distressed. Thomas, look at me. Remember how my cat and I were saved at the last moment? Life is full of second chances, and sometimes they come when we least expect them. Your son is a smart and compassionate person. Give him a chance to understand you, Emily said gently, holding his hands firmly. All right, let's try. We'll go see him tomorrow. Emily, you really will come with me? It would be so much easier if you were there, he said uncertainly, looking at her sincerely. Of course, I'll be with you. We've been through so much together, and we're not going to abandon this endeavor halfway, Emily responded confidently. Emily and Thomas arrived at the veterinary clinic on the edge of town where Jacob worked. They sat in the car for a few minutes, preparing for the upcoming meeting. Thomas nervously fidgeted with his fingers, while Emily held his hand tightly, trying to offer him confidence and support. The clinic looked welcoming, geraniums bloomed on the windowsills, and a faint sound of activity came from inside. They entered, and Emily gently nudged Thomas towards the reception desk. Hello, we would like to speak with Dr. Jacob, she said calmly to the receptionist. The doctor is currently with a patient, but you can wait in the waiting area. He'll be available soon, the receptionist replied with a smile. Thomas's heart raced faster as they sat in a corner of the waiting area. Every rustle made him jump, and every person who entered the door could be his son. Emily did not let go of his hand, as if it was the only thing keeping him from collapsing. Finally, the door opened, and a young man in a white coat walked in. He stopped upon seeing Thomas, and a look of surprise crossed his face. Dad? Is it really you? He said uncertainly. Thomas slowly stood up, leaning on Emily for support. Yes, son, it's me. I came to apologize. And to thank you. His voice trembled, and his eyes filled with tears. Jacob quickly closed the distance between them and embraced his father. Dad, I'm so glad to see you. I always hoped you'd come back, Jacob said, his voice filled with relief and joy. I've missed so much, made so many mistakes, Thomas began, but Jacob stopped him. It's all right, Dad. What matters is that you're here now. We can start over, Jacob said firmly, his eyes now shining with forgiveness. Emily stood nearby, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. She felt she was witnessing something profoundly significant, the reunion of a broken family. I'm so grateful to you, Emily. Without you, I would never have found the strength to come here, Thomas said, turning to Emily. I just did what any friend would do, Thomas. I'm glad I could help, she replied, smiling through her tears. Jacob invited them to his office, and they spent the next hour sharing stories and plans for the future. There was much laughter and many tears, but every moment was filled with hope and renewal. After the emotional meeting at the clinic, Emily, Thomas, and Jacob decided to continue their conversation in a more intimate setting. They chose a small cafe with a view of the park, where the soft evening light created a warm and inviting atmosphere. Sitting at a table by the window, they ordered tea and coffee. Thomas took his son's hands in his own, his eyes filled with determination and hope. Jacob, I know the past years have been hard for us. I've missed so much, and I deeply regret all the mistakes I made, he began, his voice quivering with emotion. Jacob nodded, gratitude shining in his eyes. Dad, I always hoped we could talk. The past can't be changed, but we can build our future. Emily smiled, watching them. Her heart was warmed seeing them together, ready to heal old wounds. Thomas, Jacob, maybe it's time for both of you to start something new? Thomas looked at his son with hope. Maybe we could start with simple things. Perhaps we could meet regularly for lunch, like once a week? I'd like to be part of your life, to learn more about your work and your interests. Jacob nodded enthusiastically. I like that idea, Dad. And I'd like to help you get settled, find a place where you can feel at home. We could look for an apartment together, maybe even somewhere close to me. The discussion turned into planning, with every suggestion from Jacob met with a smile from Thomas. Emily offered her help, feeling that her experience and support could be useful in this new endeavor. There's one more thing I'd like to share, Thomas said, his expression growing serious. I've started attending support meetings for those trying to start life anew. It's been really helpful for me, and I think it might benefit us together. Jacob placed his hand on his father's. I'm proud of you, Dad. That's a big step. And I think it's a great idea for us to share our experiences and successes. They continued their conversation, each sharing their hopes and dreams for the future. Occasionally, Emily chimed in, reminding them of their strength and resilience. As the sun slowly set below the horizon, they understood that ahead of them lay much work, but also many joys and discoveries. With each minute spent together, they strengthened their bonds, mending years of fractured relationships. That evening at the cafe became a symbol of their new beginning, a beginning of a path they had now decided to walk together. After their warm meeting at the cafe, Emily, Thomas, and Jacob spent the rest of the day together, strolling slowly through the park, enjoying the soft rays of the setting sun and their lively conversation. The air was filled with new possibilities, and each step felt like the start of something special and meaningful. When they reached Emily's house, she stopped and turned to Thomas with an offer that had long been forming in her heart. Thomas, I've been thinking about our conversation today, and about how you're trying to start over. Maybe you'd like to stay with me for a while? I have plenty of space, and you've already become a part of my family. Thomas stopped, stunned by the generosity of her offer. He looked at Emily, his eyes reflecting gratitude and a bit of uncertainty. Emily, this means so much to me, but I don't want to be a burden. Emily took his hands, and their eyes met. Thomas, you will never be a burden. You've helped me just as much as I've helped you. This isn't charity, it's an offer to support each other. You'll have a steady place to reconnect with Jacob and set up your life with a reliable support. Jacob, standing nearby, nodded in support. Dad, I think it's a great idea. We could spend more time together. And I can also help when you're ready to look for your own place. Thomas sighed, realizing that this offer was exactly the chance he had been desperately seeking. "All right," he said finally, a small smile on his face. "I'll accept your offer, hoping for a new beginning." With those words, they entered Emily's home, which was filled with warmth and coziness. That night, Emily prepared a small dinner to celebrate their new family life. The atmosphere at the table was joyful and relaxed. Conversations flowed naturally, laughter was abundant, and they shared plans for the future. In the following days, Thomas began to settle into his new life. He started attending professional development courses that Emily and Jacob found through the local community. Emily, in turn, enjoyed the company and the new purpose in her life, helping Thomas adapt and build new connections. Jacob, seeing the changes in his father, often invited him to the clinic, showing him around and explaining his work. They talked a lot about the past, but even more about what they could do together in the future. As Thomas became more confident and independent, they began looking for a place of his own, which was the next important step on his path to a fulfilling life. This chapter of their lives was filled with trials and errors, but also with genuine joy from mending broken ties and building a new future together. Emily felt her home once again brimming with life and purpose, and no matter what challenges lay ahead, they were ready to face them together. The golden autumn had arrived, and the red maple leaves gently fell to the ground, creating a colorful carpet at the entrance of Emily's house. This day was special. The house was filled with the aroma of baking and fresh herbs as Emily and Thomas prepared a dinner that would bring together all their dear ones. It was like a symbolic beginning of a new chapter in their lives, filled with promises and hopes. The dining table was elegantly set, porcelain plates, shiny cutlery, and colorful napkins. In the center stood a large bouquet of autumn flowers. Each place at the table was carefully arranged to make every guest feel special. As guests arrived, the house was filled with voices, laughter, and joyful exclamations. Jacob arrived with his wife and their 2 young children, who immediately scattered to play with the cat, Leonard. Emily's children and grandchildren, friends from the community, and several of Thomas's former colleagues who had supported him through difficult times also joined the celebration. As everyone settled at the table, Emily stood up to say a few words. "Thank you all for coming this evening. This dinner symbolizes not only our gratitude for being together, but also a celebration of new beginnings for all of us. Each of you has brought something special into my life and Thomas's life. We are grateful for your kindness, support, and unconditional love." Thomas also stood to express his feelings. "A few months ago, I couldn't have imagined that my life would change so drastically. Thanks to your support and faith in me, I found the strength to start over. Emily and Jacob, you've given me more than just a roof over my head, you've given me a family and hope." After the toasts and applause, dinner began. The table was laden with lovingly prepared dishes, oven-baked salmon with herbs, a fresh fruit salad, aromatic roasted potatoes, and an assortment of pies and desserts. The conversations at the table were warm and heartfelt, with everyone sharing their plans for the future, successes, and hopes. After dinner, the children played in the playroom while the adults continued to mingle by the fireplace. The soft light, warmth of the fire, and coziness created the perfect atmosphere for sincere conversations and laughter. That evening cemented the foundation for their future relationships, laying the groundwork for a shared future filled with support and understanding. The warmth of the kindness they shared that night became a symbol of their reunited family and new beginnings. As the last guests left the house, Emily and Thomas stood on the doorstep, grateful for each moment of the evening, which reminded them of the power of forgiveness and second chances. The warm glow of the street lamps gently illuminated their faces, and a light evening breeze whispered its secrets. Emily smiled as she watched the departing guests and, turning to Thomas, noticed something new in his eyes, a resolve and depth of feeling she hadn't seen before. Thomas took her hand and gently led her to the park, where the flowers they had planted with Jacob swayed gently under the moonlight. They walked in silence, enjoying the tranquility and each other's presence. Finally, they stopped at an old bench where they had sat together many times, discussing life and the future. "Emily," Thomas began, his voice trembling with emotion, "I don't know how to express all the gratitude I feel toward you. You've given me not only a roof over my head, but also faith in myself and in the possibility of starting over. Emily looked at him, her heart racing. She knew what these words meant to him and felt that this moment would be special for both of them. You've changed my life, Emily. You've given me not only a second chance, but hope for the future. With each day I spend with you, I feel my love for you growing. You've become not just a friend, but something much more. He knelt down on one knee, and Emily gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Thomas took out a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it, revealing an elegant ring with a sparkling gem. Emily, you've made me so happy, and I want to spend the rest of my life making you just as happy. Will you marry me? Tears of joy filled Emily's eyes. She could hardly believe her ears. This man, who once was nothing more than a lonely wanderer, had become the most important person in her life. Yes, Thomas, yes, she exclaimed, nodding her head. Thomas stood up, and she embraced him, feeling her heart swell with happiness. They stood there, holding each other under the starry sky, feeling as though they now had everything needed for happiness. Their life, once filled with trials and bitterness, was now brimming with love and hope for the future. Emily and Thomas knew that together they could overcome any obstacles and that their love would only grow stronger with each passing day. That evening, which had begun with farewells to the guests, marked the start of a new chapter in their lives, a chapter full of love, warmth, and joy.